Cast. I'm Jake Ward. I'm the president of the Connected Commerce Council. I'll be sort of a MC for the next hour. We've got some great speakers joining us today, as well as Commissioner Bush, who will be joining us in just a few minutes. Throughout the course of this discussion, we'll be touching on a number of issues, including how small businesses are dealing with the COVID-19 crisis and how they're using digital tools to power through and bridge what is, in some instances, pretty bleak today with a much brighter tomorrow. We're also going to be talking with some policy experts on how we can help to build a more sustainable safety net for those businesses in this this new normal as we move through these uncertain times. Before we get into some of the content of the topics, I want to hand it over to Jeff Mosley from the Texas Association of Businesses for a few minutes. Jeff, you're on mute, but go ahead and jump in here, and I'll just recede to the background for a moment.
Well, good afternoon, Jake, and what a delight to be able to bring greetings to the Connected Commerce Council, especially ahead of my friend and a good state leader, and that's Commissioner George P. Bush. He loves jobs and paychecks as much as we do, and so what a pleasure to share some time with him today. The Texas Association of Business is about 100 years old. We're a member organization. Our members join us so we can be their voice and their advocate. And of course, this is a very special time because businesses have literally been turned upside down due to COVID-19. And it's really a pleasure to be with the Connected Commerce Council to talk a little bit about, how we see things trending, and also to hear and listen from you about how you feel like we can be more effective as the Texas Association of Business. And we do have a website, of course, txbiz.org, so please go there, txbiz.org, and there's some things about the COVID. But more specifically, maybe you saw in the Wall Street Journal today, the editorial talked about, how lockdown states are the ones that have the highest unemployment rate. There's no denying that, the states that had the most severe lockdown are really hurting small businesses and causing higher unemployment rates. Some of those states are, well above the national average, which is about 13%. And here's Texas. We're roughly 1/10 of the U.S. economy. So the U.S. economy is 20 trillion. We're roughly $2 trillion. And we're luckily not in the top 10 of unemployment because we've had a very thoughtful approach to this. First of all, Governor Abbott pulled together a task force, and this is also online, but it gives best practices. And Governor Abbott was very clear in saying, we're going to use medical professionals to guide us on how we put our businesses back and open them back up. And then the Lieutenant Governor also has a very thorough document. You can find this online. Again, saying here are the best practices for the small business, for the manufacturers. And both of these task force really did focus on the fact that the medical professionals would guide how businesses should reopen. The governor said it over and over that once the data shows a spike or a challenge to health, then we have to go back in and relook. And I think that's really working very well in Texas, but we know small businesses are being impacted. In fact, one of my coworkers here said her son went out for football and all the kids have apps now on their phone and they have to check in before they go out on the field and take a COVID test to screen themselves. And we might remember about 20 years ago when Y2K hit, it changed us forever thinking about the value of technology in our workplace. So we know that the best practices that are going to come out of this are going to really shape the way we do business going forward, the way we do retail, the way we go and tour and do tourism and traveling, the way we recreate, the way we do manufacturing. There's no doubt that immigration and commerce and jobs are going to be impacted for a long, long time based on how we handle COVID. Well, thank you very much for letting me come and bring greetings. I know you've got a special guest lined up, and I wish you guys well. And please know the Texas Association of Business is a resource, and we'd be pleased to help any that are participating on the call today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for your continued support for businesses throughout Texas. They need it now more than ever. I think now that we've overcome some technical difficulties, we have Texas Land Commissioner George P. Bush on the line for a few minutes. Commissioner, are you there? Yep, there you are. That worked. You're on mute, sir.
Yeah, for us technologically challenged elected officials, this could be a longer process than usual. But first, I want to thank Jeff for his continued leadership at the Texas Association of Business, an important organization that backs small to large Fortune 500 companies' interests before the legislature each session. And we really appreciate your thoughts and your vision to start today's meeting. Also want to thank you, Jake, for putting this all together and organizing it. Looking forward to continued conversation as we continue this new normal as we're seeing it in the Texas economy. And I particularly want to thank PPI and R Street, Josiah, and Alec for doing what they're doing, because this isn't going to come down to one ideology. This is going to require all of us working together. And so to see a bipartisan discussion, I think, is what the Texas spirit is all about during a recovery process like this one. I want to take my time to talk about the new normal, the new economy, perhaps from a different perspective, from government. And for some of you who may know, I actually have an entrepreneurial or a business background, and I've tried to bring that to the public sector, but very thankful that Google is sponsoring and bringing a private sector approach to government so that we can be efficient for you, the taxpayer, and for those businesses that are generating a lot of that tax revenue. We've already seen with some of the large companies, including Google, provide basically a universal option to their employees to work from home, some saying for the rest of their careers in their respective business. And that's not necessarily an option that we're taking a look at in government, but I will say that of our 820 full-time employees, that all of us are working remotely, and we intend to do so until Labor Day. We're looking at technical ways in which we can put up shield guards and separate our frontline workers from potential exposure. So, that ranges from our oil spill teams up and down the Gulf Coast that have to respond to the next BP Deepwater Horizon spill, as an example, in the last decade, to our oil and gas field service workers that are in the heart of the Permian Basin in West Texas. Employees stretching the great landscape of this great state is going to require a nuanced approach to how we protect and take care of our workforce. But I know that technology is going to be a big part of it. A lot of people are surprised to hear us say this, but at the land office, we're more productive than we ever have before. We've brought on a third-party consultant to analyze how much more productive we are now that we're working digitally. And the results are actually shocking to say that now on a net basis, that we're actually saving the taxpayer a tremendous amount. We're also looking at how this affects transportation, lost time, and efficiency by having a lot of our workers that commute in from Hays County, from Williamson County to the Capitol. And we think on average, we're saving our worker about 2 hours a day just in their commute time. So, as we look at the new economy, I think it's going to force a lot of employers to take a look at how we can be more efficient, and working remotely, I think, is going to be a big part of how that looks. Now, with that, there's going to be a huge challenge. And this is a challenge that we've tried to take on in our agency and that government agencies try to take on every day. And that's the siloization, I call it, or the stovepiping of information. And we brought on and really subscribed to the idea of Team of Teams, which is a book you may have heard about or have read, that was written by General Stanley McChrystal. I didn't necessarily work with him when I was in the military, but he was the commanding officer of the Special Operations Command in Iraq during the most difficult times of the 2008 Sunni Triangle conflict. And his thesis basically is that no organization, even with confidential information like working with the CIA, FBI, and Special Operations Command, should have information that's too privileged for another part of the agency or the business to work with. And so he did whatever it took from the top to the bottom and through the chain of command to work on spreading information as viably as possible. And so, yes, we're able to look at each other right now on a Zoom call, but we can't allow our disciplines in different parts of our organizations to fall apart and to separate just because we physically have to. We have to use Zoom in a way that allows us to share information in a better and more productive way. When you look at commercial real estate, we're facing a completely different viewpoint now, with WeWork being the co-working space for entrepreneurs and for budding small businesses that were getting started. Now we're having to reevaluate the entire picture of how we come together to share ideas. And so digital processes, whether it is hopping on a Zoom call or other platforms, is going to be a way in which we're raising capital from investors, in which we're selling a potential project to a potential buyer. And so whether it's the example of WeWork or in commercial real estate, I think that it will result in a transformative paradigm shift in how we view space and how we share ideas. Now, I also want to emphasize, and I know the panel later will discuss this issue a little bit more detail in terms of privacy and the importance of not perhaps sharing too much of our data with one another, and how as Americans we like to protect that to a certain extent, but also be a part of great causes that can help one another, whether that is in the form of contact tracing so that we can highlight where the hotspots are as it relates to this virus. But we can't allow this new technology to use us. We need to have this technology work for us. And so at the Lane office, we've worked on that in a small way by producing a Khan Academy, if you will, for the energy business. So you may know that we provide one of the largest sources of revenue to public education in Texas. And I've continued my year of education. I've promised to teach 50 classes throughout the state of Texas, mostly focusing on energy and economics for high schoolers. And we have continued that digitally online. And we have actually produced a suite of lesson plans for teachers and for students across the state so that they can be a part of the process and at home learn about the energy business, whether that's in renewables, alternatives, or in the fossil fuel space. And so we think that also technology can unlock the opportunities for small business. In roundtables that we have held here in Austin, we are hearing about telehealth, for example, and telemedicine now being offered and potentially being reimbursed by insurance companies. It's crazy to think that if you are a doctor, you can't remotely see a patient and be reimbursed for that cost in seeing that patient. So I think that legislatively this January, you will see some tech-friendly bills that will come across and help businesses transact a little bit more efficiently and better, whether that's in healthcare or in the retail business. Finally, I just wanted to say that I want you to know that even though we are in many instances isolated from one another, that there is that Texas spirit. It's the same Texas spirit I saw during the recovery after Hurricane Harvey, our most devastating storm in our state's history. But now this spirit here, whether it's in the form of our healthcare workers that are rolling up their sleeves and taking the fight to this virus, whether it's the teacher that's working out a new lesson plan and getting prepared for the next academic year, which could be completely different from ones that we've ever had, or whether it's our entrepreneurs that are totally pivoting, the ones that you will hear from today, with new strategies to reach out to their customers and to their clients. I will also remind us all that it's also grave crisis in our American history that has led to a new chapter, an optimistic chapter. Whether that was World War II, which saw women leading businesses and minorities fighting in our nation's armed forces, whether it was the space race that has led to the technological innovations that we are still using today and that we can trace to. And it's Texas business owners and entrepreneurs that are a part of that picture. So I'm proud to join you all today. I look forward to working with you in the future. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Jake. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner Bush. I appreciate it. We appreciate the time today for your continued leadership. And we are right on schedule, which never happens. It's almost like conference calls working the first time. So with that, I won't waste too much time, and I'll jump right back into the content here and welcome in our first panel. We want to talk a little bit about one of the subjects that Commissioner Bush just mentioned, this idea of sort of a forced digitization, right? That small businesses are, through necessity and crisis, finding new and different ways to reach their customers, to work within their communities, and to keep their employees on payroll. There's one thing that we know at the Connected Commerce Council, whether it's Texas or Nebraska or New York, small business owners and operators are inherently independent and resolute. It's why they become small business owners in the first place, and that they will drive our economy and lead our recovery as well as they were prior to the COVID-19 crisis. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into this. Welcome in Chad Price and Jay Perkins from Killable Kings, as well as Courtney and Dr. Caldwell from ShearShare. Go ahead and hop off mute, guys, and we'll just open this right up. Okay, wonderful. All right, so by way of introduction, why don't we just say a few minutes about each of your great businesses? Jay and Chad, let's start with Killable Kings.
Yeah, so Killable Kings, we started our business about 7 or 8 years ago. Um, Three of us are college friends, some college teammates, and we decided we wanted to start our own business. And um, looking at the landscape at that time, we knew we wanted to do something in e-commerce, just because we all had full-time jobs, and we were looking to do something that we could do kind of part-time from our work desk, as well as doing it when we're at home. So that really took us into learning a lot about the internet, learning a lot about how to advertise and market and create communities and kind of gain more following using the internet and using digital tools. So even though we're a fitness company, and that is what we do for a living, I think we've really turned ourselves into a digital marketing machine when it comes to selling the products that we want to sell. So Jay handles a lot of our marketing decisions, and he uses pretty much every tool that you can imagine, whether it's from Google to HubSpot to different review terminals or what have you. We pretty much try to use every tool that we can digitally. And I think the way it's helped us so far is, when the pandemic hit and when everyone kind of shuffled into quarantine, for us, it was just the same kind of normal day. It really didn't change anything from a strategic kind of business decision-making perspective. We were still able to do everything that we were doing before the quarantine. And if we hadn't been so digitally focused, which a lot of companies weren't, we could have saw devastating effects from that. Anything else you would add to that, Jay?
Yeah, my name is Jay Perkins. So like Chad said, we co-founded the business together, been friends for almost 20 years now. From the beginning, even though we sell a physical product, we've thought of our business as a digital company. And I would encourage any business to really think about themselves as a digital company. It breaks down physical borders. It crosses over physical products. So a couple of things we always try to think about was, one, if there was ever some major interruptions to supply lines for selling kettlebells, how could we continue to exist? So, we've been fortunate in that right now people need kettlebells for workouts, but they also need the digital tools themselves. So we've been thinking for a long time, what's the digital strategy that would carry us through any potential issues if kettlebells weren't available to be sold?
That's great. All right, guys, I'll circle right back to an idea that you just sparked in my brain about digital resilience, but we'll come back to that in just a second. Courtney and Dr. Caldwell, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, hey Jake, so good to be here. We're just back from dropping our son off at the airport. He's headed back to the Air Force Academy where he plays football. But we're happy to have been able to join this morning, or afternoon rather.
Welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about ShearShare?
Yeah, so ShearShare is the first B2B mobile app that connects salon and barbershop owners to licensed beauty professionals to rent their space by the day. And so this was a problem we were trying to solve for ourselves. Yeah. So back in 2012, when we were expanding and rebranding our own award-winning salon, we found that stylists, barbers, and licensed professionals weren't really wanting to sign long-term contracts, long-term leases, but essentially they now were more transient and they really wanted to work, in the necessary days that they only wanted to work, and not just a consecutive amount of 3 to 5 days or 5 to 7 days, but daily. And so we had the opportunity to do that, and it became successful. So over the course of about 2.5 to 3 years, we were manually matching stylists and barbers and licensed professionals to other salons by the day. And it's so funny. So my background is I've been in the beauty industry for almost 3 decades, been a salon and barbershop owner for over 2 decades, have my doctorate in barbering and cosmetology, wrote a best-selling book. And so, essentially I speak to both sides of the coin when it comes to these businesses, which essentially is B2B. The licensed professionals of business and the business owner is a business amongst themselves, whether they be franchise, whether they be, a suite, whether they be, anyone that has an empty suite of a booth that's available for a licensed professional. So we were able to do that. But we know that we're in a technology age where the industry is over a century old. And so we knew that tech hasn't really penetrated into this industry. So how could we benefit now during this social media technology growing times? And Courtney and I looked at each other, and we wanted to kind of shift these licensed professionals over to somewhere that they could do it, because she's working at Oracle running demand generation marketing across 5 continents, and I'm doing all these other things, getting my degree, writing my book. And we were just like, what can we do now to help these licensed professionals? And we looked at each other and said, well, let's go onto Google and see if we can kind of put in some keywords to where there's a business out there that can sustain these people, to kind of keep them going. And we found nothing. So we looked at each other and said, how can we build it ourselves? And, it started from there. But we know that right now, technology is a driving force behind small businesses, and we wanted to use all the resources available.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the remarkable things about your story and the model, right? It's not unique to beauty salons. It's also what Uber did with cabs, and what other sort of gig economy or physical location marketplaces have seen come about in scalable technology. You're beating the inefficiency out of a marketplace.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you're creating more opportunity and then a scalable solution. I want to circle back to that in just a second to think about how you can apply that same template during a time of COVID, when so much of your businesses, so many of your partners are obviously dependent on a physical location. But before I forget it, because I'm getting old, I need to circle back with something that Jay and Chad said real quick. So the product you sell is kettlebells, but the company that you are is actually rooted in digital marketing and becoming an e-commerce sort of scalable force, right? If you were selling widgets, it wouldn't matter. I mean, it would, but it wouldn't matter. You are finding the mechanism by which to find your audience, to sell to your audience, and to gather information to improve the product, the price point, and the supply chain. Is that accurate, guys?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, I would say that's fairly accurate.
Okay, so my belief, having done research over the last couple of months at 3C, one of the things that we talk about a lot is this idea of digital resilience. And it's that businesses, particularly small businesses, that incorporate a sort of fundamental digital model. Think about their e-commerce platform, their advertising, even their back ends in terms of Intuit or CRM platforms, are surviving better amid this crisis, because there is resilience built into that agility that is driven by tools and services. Are you guys finding that? Does that ring a chord with you?
Yeah, that's definitely true, because it breaks down barriers. I mean, we have a worldwide business without ever having even left Texas, so we sell in Australia, we've sold to 60 different countries. And the only thing that's really prevented us from being completely worldwide is the fact that we ship really heavy weight, right? But what digital tools have allowed us to do is start building email lists in preparation for physical expansion in the future. So we've been running digital ads at $5 a day for the last 4 years already throughout Europe, building an email list so that when the opportunity was right, we can start moving product to a physical location there and distributing across Europe. And it's been completely through digital tools like social media and content ads that's allowed us to very, very cheaply make that transition.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people don't take into consideration just the volume difference between, a physical location or a physical presence versus a digital presence. And, we can see hundreds of thousands of people through our store, if not millions worldwide, without ever really having to alter manpower or alter, employees or anything like that. Everything just comes from the system we set up using these digital tools. So once we get a system in place that our community tells us is a valuable system for them, then we just continuously improve on that system over and over and over. And so, the bigger we get, the more feedback we get, the better the system that we've created become.
I think almost any business does have a digital aspect if you just really think hard enough about it. I mean, I would imagine that in barbering and salons, most people haven't really thought about that in a digital sense, but you have two very entrepreneurial people here who thought about it differently. I think almost any business probably has that angle if you think about it enough.
Yeah, so with that, great segue, Jay, what are you guys seeing, Courtney and Ty, of applying the model you've already made very successful? What can you but lessons can you take to keep your business running, but also that you'd give to other small businesses thinking about how to come out of this crisis with sort of a forward momentum?
Right. Yeah, so, we didn't know when we had this problem ourselves back in 2012 and then created the app and went live in 2017, that we today be in over 625 cities in 11 countries, right? But there's hair everywhere. And people actually call us Hair B&B, which I think is so cute.
It's funny.
Yeah, but I do remember the day very clearly when the number of bookings just stopped and revenue shot straight to zero, and that was not as scary of enough time for us because we've lived through Ebola, we've lived through Y2K as beauty and barber shop owners, we've lived through the recession of 2007, 2008, and beauty is one of those evergreen industries that always naturally bounces back. So we just knew that, once it goes back to zero, there's nowhere to go but up. And so I even caution to use the word pivot because we're still doing what we do, which is monetize excess capacity in these real estate markets. But one thing that we did do to change a little bit was say, okay, well, what can we do to serve our industry right now? Like, where are they hurting? And how that ended up coming to fruition was, today we have over 100 plus new pieces of content that are all about business behind the chair. So it's not about how to cut Jake's hair. It's not about the newest way to balayage. It is all about how do I apply for PPP as a salon owner? Even as an independent contractor barber, how do I access the EIDL? What are the biggest relationships that I need to be thinking about after we come out of this first pandemic? Like, why is it important to know my banker and have an accountant and have an attorney? And so being able to do that, we've been able to, be able to expose the brand to so many more people, and to be able to see those states start to come back out and reopen. I mean, even Texas, which is one of the largest states for beauty and barbering professionals, now today, almost 40% of our bookings come from the Lone Star State. And so when I go back to think about how SheerShare was pre-pandemic to where it is post-COVID-19, now we are the first B2B platform that really empowers stylists to manage and grow their businesses on their own terms. And we just happen to be starting with Space to Work because that literally sits at the beginning of the stylist life cycle.
That's great. That's great. I have one more. I'm running out of time here, guys. I could do this all day, but one more question for each of you. As we're sort of moved in, depending on where you are in the country and depending on what's going on in your state and in your community, there's sort of phase one, phase two, people are getting back to work to a degree. As you guys both know, the Connected Commerce Council in partnership with Google just put out a report that showed real optimism among small businesses throughout the country that we will get on the other side of this and that we will bounce back. It also showed an increased valuation of access to digital tools and services and e-commerce platforms amid the crisis. And I'm wondering if you have words of encouragement or sort of a statement of purpose that you would hand off to your fellow small business entrepreneurial colleagues, sort of a message of optimism.
Yeah, one of our biggest goals is to create more than 1 million industry jobs while empowering these professionals with the business tools that help maximize their earnings potential. So wherever you see, if I'm speaking to fellow entrepreneurs, wherever you see an opportunity to fuel industry recovery and to accelerate that economic advancement, that is the place to kind of double down on. That's what we're doing at SheerShare. That's clearly what the fellows are doing over at Kettlebells. And so it just makes the most sense for us to continue to help grow our local economies because that will always spill over.
It's creating that self-sufficiency that we need. Yeah. And so it keeps that, like Courtney said, it keeps us accelerating that economic mobility to kind of keep these small businesses growing faster and faster.
Great. Chad and Jay?
Yeah, I think, in general, if you're trying to either start a business or choose where to invest in your business during this time, I think it's super important to focus on your digital presence first. I think a lot of businesses focus on the things that are tangible and the things that they can see because they're more immediate and you can hold them. But the digital tools that you are able to use to your advantage, they harvest a lot more in the long run. Like Jay says, building a email list for 4 years is something that we can't physically do. We can, go over to Europe and actually do that, but we can just dedicate $5 a day and already be setting ourselves up for these types of situations. So when we have the opportunity, let's say, we get an investment or we have the opportunity to expand, now we're already strategically positioned from a digital standpoint, no matter what happens. And I think a lot of companies found out during the quarantine or, once we shut everything down, that they necessarily weren't focused on that enough.
Great. Jay, any words of wisdom?
Yeah, I would encourage anyone to think about your business digitally. That's how you can be more resilient and come back even stronger. If you are a small business owner, it's because you took a chance in the first place. Probably you have that attitude that a lot of people don't really have. So that same attitude that made you go for it in the beginning is what's going to get you through now. And if you start thinking about your business in a digital way, you can be thinking about ways that you can be coming out even stronger. Again, for just $5 a day, we built that email list, and it's over 100,000 people now. So I think, like the folks from ShearShare mentioned, they started creating content in their space. Whatever your space is, you can be creating content and articles that you can be sharing with people to not only help them be stronger, but also help you start growing more recognition and more business for yourself as well.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. And miracle of miracles, we're still on time. I don't even know what to say about this right now. But thank you. Good luck. And again, 3C is there to support everything you guys are working on. Any help that we can give you, we're happy to do it. Okay, let's flip from what small businesses are doing to make it through the crisis and all quarantine related behaviors to what policies and stakeholders, regulators can and should be doing to bring us to a slightly happier place at the end of all of this. I'm going to welcome in Josiah Neely from R Street and Alex Stepp from the Progressive Policy Institute. Gentlemen, why don't you introduce yourselves briefly? Alex, you want to kick off?
Yeah, hi, Alex Stepp from the Progressive Policy Institute. I'm our Director of Technology Policy. So I handle all things tech. My primary areas I work on, though, are antitrust and data privacy regulation. And then the Progressive Policy Institute more broadly, we're a moderate center-left think tank here in DC. We work on policy issues in every area. And really, our slogan is that we're radically pragmatic. So we want to get things done and help improve governance throughout the country. And so we're happy to be participating today. We thank, in particular, our previous co-panelists and Commissioner Bush as well for participating.
Thanks, Doug. Josiah?
I'm Josiah Neely. I am a senior fellow and the Texas director at the R Street Institute. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit research organization on the center right, market friendly. We work on a bunch of issues too: criminal justice, insurance, tech and privacy. I do a lot of work on energy, but also other issues as well. And we're headquartered in Washington, DC, but I get to live here in Texas. So very glad to be here today.
Wonderful. So I have a captive audience now, so I'm going to pick your brains a little bit selfishly on this. As you know, the Connected Commerce Council is a nonprofit membership organization for more than 10,000 small businesses. And our sort of founding value is the idea that digital technology is empowering American small businesses, that it's the driver behind scale and secure, affordable access to a brighter future for American small businesses. We just heard from two panelists who are surviving the COVID crisis, are actually leaning toward a brighter day in terms of what they're going to be able to do with their technologies, and they're handing off words of wisdom to other small businesses like them. Why then can I not open a newspaper anywhere in the country without hearing that Google and Facebook and Amazon and the other providers of this technology are being sued or investigated by various attorneys general or the FTC or the Department of Justice? What's going on?
Well, I mean, I would say that far from being surprised, you should probably expect that as an area of the economy becomes more important, the attention of government will be drawn to it. It's in fact, the more money, there's the old statement that you rob banks because that's where the money is, right? So as the economy goes more digital, governments, elected officials, regulators, it becomes more interesting to them, and all sorts of issues that might have not have seemed so important before, it's going to get a lot of more attention there. That would be my summary.
Yeah, I think
a brief digression. Sorry, Alex, one second. A brief digression, if you'll allow me, guys. I was having a conversation with a policymaker not that many years ago, centered around much of the same topics that we're discussing right now. And I said to them, but it's working, right? The way that the digital economy is vertically integrated works. Platforms are greater than the sum of their parts because they empower small businesses, because data is not oil, it's water, right? It's free flow, it is ubiquitous, it is renewable, all of these things. Why then does government have to get involved to the degree that it will try to tighten the screws on an economy that is thriving? And this very prominent policymaker turned to me and said, because birds got to fly. And I think that's where we are. Alex, I cut you off. So please.
That's a great digression. I support it. I agree with both of your comments. I think I try to take things serious on a policy substance basis. So whenever I see all these antitrust claims, in particular against the biggest tech companies, I try to evaluate them on their merits. And in the US, it's important for our audience to know that we have a consumer welfare standards. That means that the government evaluates corporate behavior and corporate actions on how it affects end consumers. And so if any, I think, unbiased observer looks at the digital economy and says, are consumers benefiting from this in terms of free digital tools and services? Are they allowed to reach more consumers by using these tools? I think that's just, it's obvious. Prices are falling in all of these markets. Output is going up. So if you ask academics who work in antitrust, most of them will say that these cases are weak or not, at least not slam dunks. And so I think you might look for other motivations why these cases are coming. I think if you just look at policymakers' public statements, they say that they're most worried about political speech. And that's nowhere in our antitrust laws. They have evolved over time to focus on consumer welfare and have a very economics-oriented approach. But I think that a lot of politicians see antitrust in particular, but other regulations and rules as a cudgel to pressure the companies from both sides, either Democrats or Republicans, to say, I want to pressure them to do what I want, to promote the kind of speech I like, or suppress the kind of speech I don't like. And so I think they're kind of caught in between those two forces right now. And that's why you see this political football going back and forth and why it's kind of a never-ending thing.
It does feel like there's a conflation of privacy/data issues, of antitrust and just overarching control, and then CDA 230 free speech components. And all of it actually aligns across partisan, traditional partisan fault lines to be more who wants to push on which technology at the time. I mostly don't care, except that instability for small businesses is particularly problematic. And as some of you may have read, because we've been pretty loud about this, it is incredibly problematic amid a global pandemic where you're seeing record unemployment and disruption to the marketplaces anyway. Denying access or even creating instability of access to the sort of data supply chain could have ruinous effects for our economy. Forget about small business economy. Josiah, I look at you were about to say something. Sorry if I cut you off. If not,
no. I was just thinking about your profound words there.
Yeah, I'll just
how
follow up.
profound they are. They're more practiced than anything.
Jake, that reminds me of one of the most common arguments you hear in DC over the last few months, because I think people are seeing that the tech sector is probably the most resilient sector in our economy right now. It's really holding up. The internet, these services, there's no downtime that you can depend on them. As we shifted from working in offices to working from home, as students shifted from getting educated at schools to learning at home, there's been very few reports of outages or just reports of this new system failing. And so I think that the new in vogue thing in DC is to say that they're actually so essential and it's working so well. These are now the new utilities, and so we must regulate them because they're too critical and they're too important. And I think you'll see these comparisons to the EU and the US, where the EU has more of a history of regulating tech under this mindset, this utility mindset. And I think you should just ask yourself, like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Like, if policies that are working for the last 2 decades in terms of a light touch regulation approach to tech has allowed innovation, has allowed them to support small businesses. So now small businesses, like our friends on the previous panel talked about, you can reach new customers with targeted advertising that you could not do, on television or radio 20 years ago. It was uneconomical for small businesses. I think it'd be weird to kind of kill the golden goose because you think that it's become too essential.
As someone who spent many an evening in Brussels fighting with regulators over there over the last 15 years, I can assure you that it wasn't working and they broke it worse. GDPR immediately slowed churn, investment, and growth of small businesses. And that was just data specific. I mean, forget about the monopolistic side of it.
Yeah. We're already seeing the data roll in for that. So I try to follow the academic literature closely. And the latest studies show that venture capital is down 50% in Europe relative to what it would have been otherwise. They use a comparison approach compared to the US. And so a lot of investors and entrepreneurs are realizing that the regulations aren't worth the hassle, especially if you're in any kind of like data focused business.
So that I could do this all day, but let's try to free this up to the next subject. In a time of COVID, right, where data is critical to doing contact tracing, it is critical to testing, it is critical to understanding where we as a nation in response are drawing the lines, the borders between my personal data and the public interest. How do we go about helping small businesses stay inside the lines? How do we go about, from a policymaker standpoint, enabling platforms to do a good job in the interest of public health, and then turning that switch back off? You know, I'm not sure we've ever been really good at ratcheting APIs up and down, but this may put us in a really tough spot. Josiah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Obviously, I think that there are a lot of issues, some of which Commissioner Bush mentioned, particularly with regard to telemedicine and other licensing issues that could be impediments to doing things over via screens as opposed to in person, and all requirements for certain things to be in person or not. Some of those can be temporarily waived and have been, but many of those are going to need legislative changes or updates. Another big issue that I think we have right now is we don't know what the end game is, right? So we don't yet know, is this something that was kind of a temporary thing and then things will start to go back to normal? Is there going to be a second COVID wave or something else where, you know, if you talk about what are schools going to look like in the fall? I know a number of universities, Harvard has announced they're doing their semesters all online. Other places are doing online. So there's a lot that's still up in the air, and therefore we don't quite know. I think, given that there's so much uncertainty, you know, you mentioned the idea of resilience, and part of resilience, I think, is flexibility, right? Giving people more options so that they can quickly toggle between physical location versus digital. I think that's going to be very helpful in letting us weather, regardless of what the different scenarios are.
I think that's 100% right, Josiah. We pretty frequently use the term agility when we're thinking about this. Flexibility is important, but agility creates sort of a binary state where you can move from doing one thing to doing another. And we have been told that the thing that enables agility is data. That's right. Making decisions without a gun to your head enables you to make clearer decisions, but having a clear roadmap of where to go is the only way to get there. And so what we're encouraging our members through 3C resources, events like this, is to consider analytics, partnerships, folks that they can work with on a local or state level to figure out where resources are available, where funding is possible, and how to get back to business as usual, or at least business as usual adjacent, as quickly as possible. But all of that comes back to empowerment from the 2 dozen large to larger technology platforms that have made these resources available. And I'm talking everybody from Salesforce and Constant Contact to certainly Google and Facebook and Instagram and Amazon and eBay and Etsy. There are dozens of them, and every one of them offers not a bespoke solution, but rather an off-the-rack solution that can be customized to your needs and demands. I'm terrified of what's going to happen if there's a residual. Let me back up for just a second. The wheels of government and the wheels of innovation do not mesh naturally. One is intended to move incredibly quickly. The other is supposed to fundamentally move slowly. And when those two things grind together, it is often problematic for businesses of lesser size to keep pace with the instability created by government, federal or state. And we are, I mean, you can probably hear the real anxiety in my voice. Like, that's the thing that scares me. It's not that these guys aren't going to get back to work. They're going to do that. They're going to find ways to do it. It's that they're going to run into trouble because policymakers aren't able to catch up or get ahead of this curve, and because they're not listening to what small businesses are saying.
Yeah, I want to return with that real quick, Jake, because I think it kind of gets overlooked sometimes in the policy discussion, the disproportionate impact that regulations often have on small businesses relative to big businesses. So regulations often a fixed cost, right? If you're a tech company of any size, you get your lawyers in your room, you get a team of engineers, and you say, all right, new regulation came in. The lawyer helps specify with the engineer how they should implement this. Once they implement it, whether you're scaling that new tool or feature to 1,000 users or 1 million users, it's about the same cost, right? And so as a share of revenue, that's a much larger expense as a share of the business for the small company than it is for the big company. And so oftentimes you'll see big companies that are less uncomfortable with regulations, or they want to have a seat at the table in drafting them, but the small guys get left out of the room. And I think that's a really important voice that needs to be at the table. And one of the main areas I work on, like I mentioned, is privacy regulation. In Europe, obviously they had GDPR, like we mentioned before, which was their omnibus comprehensive privacy regulation package that's been a disaster by almost every measure. Even many of those who supported it aren't satisfied with it. And in the US, we see California's CCPA, so a state level privacy law that has a lot of the worst features of GDPR in Europe. And so now the question is, what can federal policymakers do to improve the status quo? So how can we protect a user's privacy without being too onerous on businesses and giving them clear rules that they can follow across state lines, right? So I know many small businesses are trying to grow from just their home state to other states. And so how can we make sure there's a single standard that's reasonable, so that as they grow, they don't need to keep talking to lawyers, keep changing their features on their platforms. And so that's an area that I'm really focused on and trying to work on, so that regulation can be less onerous on businesses.
Alex, I heard this the other day. I'm not sure if it's true. It might be apocryphal, but under CCPA, the California state government can't release a COVID tracking app because it would immediately violate CCPA law for the number of installs and the control of data.
I had not seen that one, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think this is actually, I'm glad you mentioned the contact tracing apps thing. I think this is one of the reasons we've seen in DC a few senators have put forth temporary COVID privacy bills. So they have similar features of what a permanent federal privacy law would look like, but they're intended to address the coronavirus crisis. And I think when you're trying to use data to combat a pandemic or any kind of public health crisis, trust is the most important thing. And so if you have rules in the books, hopefully they were passed years ago or sometime in the past that already makes sense for being compatible with the technology, that's really the ideal scenario. So you want to do that work now, so that when the next crisis rolls along, we're not trying to figure these things out on the fly and we find out that CCPA is potentially incompatible with these things. But the one note I'll make is that the most prominent one, the Google Apple contact tracing API that undergirds all of these state public health apps, it's actually very privacy protective. So all it does is when you activate it with an app on your phone, it shares Bluetooth tokens with other phones you come nearby, but it's all anonymous. All the data stays on the phone. And just when someone is confirmed to be infected with coronavirus, there's an announcement over the network with those randomly identified numbers. And so you get a notification that you might have been infected, but no one else knows that. There's no central database. Right. There's nothing with your name or record of who you've been near. And so I think it's really awesome that the tech companies on their own have been able to design a privacy protective system, but that would work even better, right, if there were already rules on the books that were compatible with that.
That's right. Josiah, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I think that one thing that I would say is that in order for these, particularly if you're talking about something like contact tracing, but also with digital in general, is that it's only going to work if people feel generally comfortable using it, right? So the contact tracing, there's a incentive or necessity, to get people comfortable with the privacy protections involved. Otherwise, it will not be effective because people won't want to use it. They won't want to answer the questions, install the apps, et cetera. And I think that that's also true more broadly with a lot of online commerce. Some I think, I have relatives, for example, who the first time they ever did an online order was in March, particularly if you're talking about, ordering food or something like that, because if it's something new, you don't want to deal with it. But so, ease of use and privacy concerns, those are things that government officials care about or want to get involved in, obviously. But to the extent that consumers themselves are concerned about that and are not going to want to use your products unless those protections are in place, that also is a reason for the companies themselves to be concerned about it.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, we're nearly out of time here, guys. Well, let me ask one sort of wrap up question. Any guidance, any counsel, any thoughts that you could provide the small businesses on the line right now in terms of what they should keep an eye out for and what they should think about in terms of policy or regulation affecting the way that their businesses are set up?
Let's see. I think just make sure that I gotta go back to if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I think if you have any connections with state level policymakers in Texas or federal policymakers, members of Congress, senators who go, make sure that they're aware that you're using these tools and that you're continuing to benefit from them, because I think right now the system's working, that it's critical that many physical small businesses are now online for the first time. And we've heard great stories today about how that transition's going and the resiliency of those businesses, but it could get broken at the federal level. And so unfortunately, I think we need more disaster relief. So we need a phase 4 bill to backstop state and local governments. We need a phase 4 bill to continue loan programs, no interest loans to small businesses that need them while their revenues have been decimated. And so there's some affirmative things they can do, but in general, I think the message should be that we should be getting success stories out there and letting people know that if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
We're trying. Josiah?
Yeah, so all I would want to say is I want to thank the prior panelists for being so adaptive. And sometimes, you start your business and you think it's going to be one thing, and then it turns out that to be successful, you got to have it be something else, right? I think that was definitely the case. There's a little bit of that with the SheerShare, and so I just want to congratulate them for putting themselves out there, and also being willing to be flexible and adapt to whatever comes, because things don't, you have a plan, but as a famous man once said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Punched in the face. That's right.
And so, reality is like that sometimes. So just, you got to be willing to bear that. And if you're successful at it, I think that's admirable.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. And thank you to Commissioner Bush and to our panelists from SheerShare and Killable Kings, to the Texas Business Association, and for all of our attendees today. Go to connectedcouncil.org for more information on some of the programs we talked about today. Also, check out PPI and R Street's websites. They're doing great work. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon. Stay safe and be well. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks for staying on time.
Yeah, look at that. That's pretty incredible.